Yep. All right. So I hear you. Do you have a camera?
Yeah, I do have a camera.
Okay, cool. So let me. So if you want to start your video, I'm going to start my video.
All right. You can see me all right?
Sounds like I'm getting some audio.
It sounds the background.
Oh, that's why. Yeah, hold on. I know what it is. Okay. There we go. Okay. That should work. How does that sound? You got me, Anthony?
Yeah, I hear you well.
All right, let me pull up my video.
There we go.
All right. How you doing today, Anthony?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for coming to talk to Bubbleblabber today. I appreciate having you on the call. Alrighty. So say hi to the watchers of Bubbleblabber. You're gonna be on Bubbleblabber.
Glad to be here. Glad to be here.
So yeah, I mean we've been hearing a lot of things about you, Anthony. You know, you're real. It sounds like you're a real up and comer. You know, you're one of those guys that like just kind of wants to make it. You know, you're working, and then you're working on your side projects, which I get.
Yeah, of course. You know, the side hustle. We need it.
The side. That's right. And but so what has? I mean, you're in New York, right?
Yeah, so in New York, New Jersey. Both my partner and I live in Jersey. He lives in Queens.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I got to tell you, I mean, you know, what has New York been like? I mean, how do we even describe it to anybody who hasn't been here?
It's been deserted.
Yeah.
It's practically been, it's almost like a dystopian, kind of that uncanny valley of it's New York, but it's been very empty,
Yes. Yeah.
It's strange.
I mean, I grew up in New Jersey, right off the, right on the Jersey Shore. And so I've always been outside of New York City pretty much my whole life. And I recently just moved to Stanford because the infection rate in New Jersey just kept going up and up and up and up. And I was like, I don't want to be around for that. And, so I moved in with my girlfriend in Stanford, and it's, probably one of the better decisions I ever made, because New Jersey is still out of control right now. Like in terms of,
it's true.
They're the highest out of everybody in the area. So I'm just like, you know what? I think it's gonna be a while before I go back to Jersey.
But hopefully, we're still gonna be around for that.
Yes, that's right. And as luck would have it, you're developing an animated series all about all the crazy things that could happen in New York City.
Yeah, it's
and you probably never could have thought.
No, it's taking
some of it probably even came true. Like a little bit.
It's a reality.
If you think about like the dystopian, even like after 9/11, like New York City really, I mean, it wasn't completely normal, but it was more normal than it was now. Like I remember being in the city only like a couple months after 9/11 happened, and it was Christmas, and it was just it was busy. It probably wasn't as busy as it got years later, obviously, but I didn't think it was like compared to today, it was night and day. Like and that was that's what we thought was the biggest catastrophe at the time.
Yeah, I know. And I remember I was pretty young during that time.
Yeah.
So like when that happened, it touched base, like it touched home.
Yeah.
So it was more of, I'd say, like a cultural silence rather than like everything is shut down, everything is over.
Sure, yeah. But it's just interesting though, like we thought like that was going to be the weirdest thing we were ever going to see, and then here we are to today, and this is now the weirdest thing we've ever seen, and who knows what tomorrow is going to bring. Like it just seems like it's been, and not only that, but like we've had all of these the social movements, like the Black Lives Matter movements and things like that in downtown, and that kind of turned the city upside down again in a sense, because it was just so many people.
Yeah, it's true.
Were there. It almost felt like New York of old again, but for a different reason. They were all just going one way, and so really crazy. So Anthony, tell us a little bit about you. Like, where you said you're from New Jersey. Where did you guys go? Where did you go to school, and how did you meet your partner?
So my partner and I first met in Jersey City, New Jersey. That's where I'm from.
Yeah.
And we started off in high school. He was always been the artistic type, and I was always very into writing.
Hmm.
So as we developed, I got very much into film. That kind of transitioned into my passion into animation,
Hmm.
just because it's so much more precise and he's so much more like Steven Spielberg once said it. It's like
Yeah.
a good director should always be an animator.
Sure.
That would be ideal because you
Hmm.
really get to know every aspect of every frame. So having those passions combined, we came up with this story, and we've been collaborating ever since. I'd say ever since 2014 we've been scheming things up.
Sure, sure. And so it's always natural for like someone who's developing their first series. They always kind of go a lot of the ones that are in like the business now got their start making things that were very much closer to home. If you look at some of the great ones, uh, I mean, it's Matt Groening with Portland, it's Seth MacFarlane with Rhode Island. It's closer to where they've come from. So it seems only natural that you would pick New York City as a setting for whatever story it was going to be. It
Yeah.
was going to be New York City.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, I think it was around 2015. My partner moved to Sunnyside, Queens,
Hmm.
and so we spent a lot more time over there.
Hmm.
So Queens as a whole, the city became so much more alive. The spontaneity of events really made us kind of take that, but put it through our kind of surreal lens. Really put a twist on it that
Sure.
you really only feel when you're in the moment. Like
Sure. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I get it. And New York City is rife with culture, and it's rife with. It's interesting. It's one of those settings. Like if you think about someone like the Marvel TV series on Netflix, it's like they all picked like a block, and then they focus on that block. And some people outside of the city don't understand that you can literally have a week's worth of things going on in any just a block or two, like
Yeah.
Harlem and downtown, and some of these areas of the city really are different worlds sometimes
Yeah,
because
and that was really much kind of our goal. I think that
yeah,
when you think of New York City in popular media, you think of Manhattan, you think
yeah,
of most of that side.
yeah,
But I think of like to switch the lens and bring that kind of mix of suburbia, but like the cityscape. It's like
sure,
that's what you kind of get when in parts of Queens, where it's like it's quiet, but it's not. It's almost, I'd say it's like a twisted version of suburbia.
yeah, yeah,
And that's kind of what intrigued us because
yeah,
there are landscapes and visuals that we've seen that are beautiful. It's like an abandoned railroad with grass growing, and then there's buildings in the background. It's the juxtaposition that really intrigued
yeah, sure.
us.
So you mentioned before that you were big into animation, that it's always been a passion for you. Do you have any favorite franchises or producers, and then what are some of the influences that you've had that have influenced? Of course, we're talking about your first development project, After the Storm. What are some of those series that have kind of influenced what you guys are working on?
So I'm big MTV fan. Like I
Mm,
love that kind of MTV Adult Swim, that kind of animation. Ever since I was a kid, that's really what I grew up on. Staying up late nights and watching those animations. It was different. You watch SpongeBob, and then all of a sudden it's Aqua Team Hunger Force, and it's
yeah.
it's off the rails, and it's crazy. So when I came to this project, I really took inspiration from the Darias and the Clerks,
Hmm.
and went to a much more, I'd say, like grunge Americana,
Yes.
and I love it
Yeah.
because what you get from for example, Daria, which was a spinoff of Beavis and Butthead, it
Hmm.
was really a critique on America as it was, like the white picket fence, and it brought it through a different lens,
Hmm.
and
Sure.
seeing as we've seen so much of again like New York and that urban environment, but it's like kind of dissecting it a bit more, like going a bit more specific,
Yeah.
and a big inspiration of mine, and he's not really animation, but it's David Lynch.
Hmm.
And because the way that he can construct a mystery, a setting, a tone, an atmosphere, that's really what our goal is, to create that. And that's why we went with animation,
Hmm.
because we knew that to really capture it, it was almost right now the budget for that would be off the rails.
Crazy, yeah.
So it's like to take that through animation and really stretch it. Like you can do things that maybe visually you wouldn't do otherwise. You know, it stimulates you.
Sure. And so, like, what kind of spurred specifically? Of course, we're talking about After the Storm. What turned it into like a couple of ideas to maybe a couple of things, and then turned it into this one thing, this one, I guess, kind of nut of an idea that you had.
So, kind of, our goal was very much to have this story about this girl. Dominican American, like I really wanted to dig into the culture and something that we really haven't seen in animation represented. And my goal was very much to take the atmosphere of the Dominican American household, that culture, all that, and I took that and I took New York. And the homeless situation, which is really part of the story, is her finding herself homeless and having to survive that is really key, because I wanted to take the fear of the city. Also, it's like it started off as, oh my gosh, it's just I'm homeless and I got to figure out, to evolve to this almost like this horror story.
Sure.
So it's like, wow, the fears that you can come across being a young girl alone in the city, having to fend for yourself. Like, how do you do it? Then what?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. And so what are some of the things upon Dominican American life that you wanted to touch upon? What do you think are some areas that you think are just foreign to anybody who might not be familiar with what it's been like, what it's like to grow up in that environment? What are some of the things you wanted to really bring across?
The main thing I want to highlight is almost like the generational gap. Like there's always a generational gap by nature, but taking that into a cultural sense, like certain small things, as in like, the way that one conducts yourself in the household. Just like the culture as of like what you're expected versus what is, like, for example, you might like, I'm going to go to a personal sense, which is my parents, right? I like animation. I like writing. For them, that's an abstract concept.
Yeah.
So maybe the passions that for us, in American culture, it's like, it's normal to go after those dreams. In the context of Dominican American culture, it's like, yes, you can do that, but it's like there's certain guidelines that you don't like, realistic, those goals. So anytime you go out of that mold, there's always a clash. Anytime that you break certain traditions, it's a clash. So it's interesting to see how you take someone who was pretty much born here and have that culture clash versus her mother, and also how she tried her best, like the mother tried her best. So the daughter, sometimes it's kind of when you get older and you realize that your parents did the best they could, and then you realize that you could mess up or really F it up, and you're like, oh crap, I kind of get my parents now, and it's
sure.
That's really much where our main character came from.
Yeah, and of course your character is growing up in a New York City that's a melting pot anyway. Yeah. All these different cultures are coming together, and I'm sure she's getting into some sort of a culture, almost like a culture conflict, like, hey, how do I fit here type of a thing, And on top of that, it's all these horror elements and what have you. So how are you guys are looking to balance that? Like, how do you want to balance the social elements that we do know of versus the fact that it is, it's almost like that Last of Us type thread of, hey, we're getting into some horror and we got to keep a tab on that.
Yeah. So something that we also wanted to do is like subtlety is key, and we don't want to just thrust it all up into like, this is like, there's no monster per se, right? There's more of the essence of the city, and that's really where the horror stems from. It stems from the mysteries of strangers who stand out more than others. For example, there's a key character who is a recurring character for they're in the background, and it affects all our characters. And she starts following almost like almost in an invasive sense,
Mm-hmm.
and it gets into our character's psyche,
Mm-hmm.
which allows us to tackle that specific characters, like our Keith, which is our main character's sidekick, his drug use,
Mm-hmm.
because in a way, that's really where the horror comes from. There's no monster under the bed. It's how we internalize the world around us.
Yeah.
And if you were homeless, had nowhere to go, and kind of were drugged up, and your perception of reality shifts. So the horror comes from their perception of the world, per se.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sure. So what is the storm? Like the series is called After the Storm. So what's the storm that we're coming after?
So it's both figurative and literal,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a giant storm that's happening the night of that. Coincidentally, Ramona is kicked out and she's homeless and she has to figure it out. So conflict ensues when her best friend kind of starts a fight and antagonizing someone who was antagonizing her.
Mm-hmm.
You think you're doing the right thing,
Yeah.
miscommunication, and instead of it ending up with, oh, it's all resolved, by the end of it, on some shenanigans, there's consequences, because after they are followed by the people they were, got into conflict with, they get into a crash, a devastating crash, which then leads them to have to, deal with the consequences of really having nowhere to go. Survival. It's pretty much survival.
Sure.
And obviously the storm is kind of a catalyst, because that's really what causes the on-road collision.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so going through your cast of characters, tell me a little bit about them, and then what were your inspirations for the characters? Like, how did you come up with like their personalities and how they interact with each other?
So the main character is 23-year-old Ramona Garcia. She's a Dominican American girl, lives in Queens. She's kind of, I'd say, a Zendaya type from Euphoria. Like, if you've seen that, like,
Sure.
she's very laid back. She's kind of zoned out, and she does what she can, but doesn't go above and beyond. Not that she's a bad person, but she's just never had to face reality, I'd say. And her best friend Keith, who's also in a similar situation, he's a bit older and he's kind of more streetwise, so he knows how to he can kind of navigate this world. And pretty much music helped me a lot. I got to be honest. While writing, I listened to a lot of like Nirvana for his character,
Mm-hmm.
Princess Nokia for Ramona's character,
Mm-hmm.
and I took inspiration from a lot of people that I knew who also went through similar homeless situations. And even, I know it firsthand how it could be just to be kind of up in the air, not knowing where you're going to sleep at night.
Sure.
So taking all those things together, it really helped me construct these cohesive characters with kind of unique personalities, per se.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, so you were talking about some of the personal elements, which is, you've kind of been in those shoes of not knowing where you're going to sleep at night. Tell me a little bit more about that. Like, what, where is that coming? Are you, have you had any firsthand experience of not knowing, being just above a certain financial limit or anything like that? What's
of
that?
Of course. I remember I used to be like couch surfing it at my friend's house. I just did it like, I was at a point a couple of years back where I didn't know. I was living for like my friends from work. Like it was very bare minimum, and it was rough.
Mm-hmm.
And through that, you meet a lot of people as well who are in that similar situation. A lot of friends of mine who you don't know, and it doesn't always look how you think. It's not always like somebody in the street like being like, oh, give me change. It could be just a random person on the train trying to go from one hustle to the other, just trying to survive.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think that, especially in this time, a lot of people could relate to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a real horror. That's like this. It's not an existential dread.
Yeah.
If it's anything, it's quite like, I'd say it's something mundane mixed in with like this Lovecraftian horror of, there's the how could you defeat this? Like, how can I overcome this?
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes I can see where you're coming from, where like there are people that get into that kind of almost like a defeatist point of view where they're like, how am I going to possibly get past that? And then there are some people who want to work for it and they're going to do everything they can to get past it. So it's interesting that you're kind of looking at it from both sides of the quarter, like in terms of, hey, look, I want to, this isn't going to define me. I want to, and I said I could see like I said, it looks like you're from work, so.
Yeah. I'm at work right now. I'm at
Yeah.
work. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean,
Yeah.
there are some people who would just be totally fine with, hey, I'm not going to even try. And so to see you overcome that and get to where you are now, worst comes to worst, the show doesn't get picked up. Hey, you got further than where you thought you probably could have
It's true. That's
possibly. I'm sure there were a lot of people out there that didn't get as far as where you are now, and just getting a pickup would, obviously propel you quite a bit. So when you're talking about some of the aesthetic of the show, what do you want it to look like? Are you inspired more about like like are there any shows that you can kind of compare it to in terms of what you want the setting to look like, what you want New York to look like?
So practically, my goal aesthetically is to present something a bit akin to, I'd have to say, animation wise. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Venture Brothers,
Mm-hmm.
the way that they can just create these atmospheric tones to New York, and really take the environment of the city. And I love what they did with season 7 when they came to New York. I'm like, that really was a big inspiration to see it brought to life in such an authentic way. Even though the surrounding of the environment was kind of outlandish, I was like, oh, but the setting, the background, like the way that the environment, like they interact with the environment, that's something I want to bring very, very New York,
Sure.
And
it's,
also,
it's coming from two guys that are based in New York, Jackson Public and
yeah,
Doc Hammer. So it's, you're kind of getting again that personal element when they're creating their IP. They're putting themselves into it. So that's great. That's pretty cool that you picked up on that.
yeah. And with the character wise, we very much went with Jamie Hewlett, the artist for Gorillaz.
Uh-huh.
He was a big inspiration, and especially with the character designs, I wanted something that could kind of melt to whatever environment we're at. Like it's very gritty at times and very, like, it feels tangible, it feels dirty, and that's something that we wanted to bring.
Mhm.
And another aspect that really doesn't have to do with the animation, but more our goal is actually to get it made in 3:4 aspect ratio of our television, just because we actually want to deal with what has to do with the framing of shots and make it unique to something that you mostly just see in film. But it'd be interesting to see that same kind of composition brought into animation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so tell me a little bit more about Lewis. How did you get working with him? And then what are some of his influences that he's bringing into the series?
So we started working, like I said, back when we met in high school.
Mm-hmm.
So we've always been, best friends, creating these projects.
Mm-hmm.
But a big influence for him is Jack Kirby. He's big into the comic book illustrations, and he wanted to play with just taking New York, like you said, New York City, Stan Lee. These people were based here, and they kind of presented the city through their lens. So this also gave him an opportunity to be able to put the kind of draw New York as he sees it, as he feels it. It's very much, you get that emotional connection to landmarks that maybe aren't world renowned, but if you're from the environment, if you're from the city, the part of town, like, that landmark, the Pepsi Cola sign, something like that,
Sure. Yeah, it makes sense. And so you mentioned you guys have been working together for a long time. So what are the things that he does well that he kind of fills in for you? And then what are the things that you do well that kind of fills in for him? Like, how do you guys clash at all? What's going on there?
No, it's funny because we could spend hours speaking about kind of the way that I come up with, like, I have a loose concepts. And for me, a big part of this is kind of the interconnected story of the characters. So many times I have an idea how they connect, and he rebuttals with an artistic view. He's like, no, well, I visually see it like this, and that completely shifts like the way that I saw the scene. Because now I'm like, oh, I like, it's almost like, yes, I get it. Like, I get what you're doing. We can bounce off that, and the visuals many times guide me, as in like, oh, I see how I can like play around with the framing of the room. You know, it's less of an abstract thing and more of an actual concrete scene. And vice versa. Sometimes I'm just like, he has no idea kind of how to interpret the world. And even me with my limited artistic skills, you know, I might sketch something up and I'm like, what do you think? And he's able to take that and elevate it into something that is presentable, you know.
But that's good though, because I mean, it's great to like kind of identify what your weaknesses are, and the purposes of a team is to have people that like complement, you know, your strengths and your weaknesses. So you know, the more formidable duos that I see in this business are the ones that like work together, and they, you know, this one fills in where this one goes, and you know, so on and so forth. So it's interesting that you went there. How much time do you have, Anthony? Do you have?
I still have half an hour.
You're good for a half hour? Okay, I just want to make sure you're good on time.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, so your pitch mentions that you're looking into the clash of culture and generations, and then, you know, some of the mystery that you want to unfold in the background. What are the things that you're hoping to hit on as you progress, not just for season one, but for future seasons as well?
So something that Lou and I were very interested is diving into the role of the subconscious and the kind of the new age meditation, like the new age view on spirituality, and taking our characters through this odyssey. And almost like a Shakespearean odyssey, sometimes you can come across random occurrences in the street that might seem like foreshadowing for something deeper, or maybe a lot of time our dreams speak to us in a way that strangely coincides with reality. And something that I've experienced in New York City is that these pseudo supernatural moments where it's like someone on the train might just be saying some spooky shit. I'm sorry, I'm some spooky stuff. And you're just like, okay, they might be high off their mind, but at the same time, it's just like, just the way that the atmosphere is set up, like framed correctly, it gives off, you know, that really inspired me to be like, hey, this could actually be set up as very eerie if there was some connotation or some something tying it to reality, or at least what ties into reality, into our universe, which is the dreamscape.
Sure. How has COVID, you think, influenced the show at all? Because how do you not have an influence, like, given everything that has gone on, and it's about the struggles in New York City? How would it not? Especially when you're talking about the future. I mean, you might have had some things down on paper before COVID happened, obviously, but I would have to think something may have marinated in there.
So kind of something we debated is if we kind of implemented the COVID like the things that are going on in COVID, we kind of strayed away from that simply because it was something that we kind of like, we didn't want to date it, you know. But something that we did take from this whole situation was just to see how vast the label of homeless, you know, it's not something that prior to that maybe most people had the connotation to the person in the corner, like it's this specific image of what it meant to of poverty, and being like, no, that's not the truth. The truth is that it's something that can creep up on anyone, no matter your background or what it is.
So if not COVID, what about politics? Because I would have to imagine, you know, some of the reasoning for particular struggles that happen, especially in New York City, you can't help but think they are politically motivated in some instances. So do you guys go there at all? And are you guys, and of course there's politics, and there's the extreme of politics that we dealt with the last 4 years. So what, you know, what does that do for you guys, if anything at all?
So that fills in their world, practically, because the truth is that there's two narratives, even in life, for everyone. There's the narrative of our life, and then there's the political narrative that's happening behind us. No matter what happens in the White House, I still have to clock into work. So that's kind of what goes on. It's like we see these characters dealing with their struggle, and in the background, there's a lot of things happening. Just because the world is alive, it's something that obviously sometimes it can affect them, and in certain moments it does, because at the end of the day, if there's a protest or a march or something that just you can't, it's just there's no way that it's not going to affect you, then we see it cross paths. But it's kind of dancing this line of that's something that exists in our world, but it's not the main story. But it is something that it's a reality that exists here.
Well, even if not national politics, what about local politics? Because I watch the news every day. I always watch Eyewitness News every day, and the mayor is on every single day, and it seems like he always makes a decision every single day about something that could affect somebody at any given time in the 5 boroughs. So, I mean, does that play a role at all in the fact, not just so much the national politics, but the local politics and the potential that can possibly cause conflict for like Ramona and whatnot?
Yeah, of course. I think that at the end of the day, it's also seeing how these characters, with their faults, right, have to juggle the kind of responsibility and, like I said, their own narrative of what's going on with them. And that's where the conflict comes in as well, because if I'm trying to move forward in a specific direction and you're pulling back, there's conflict. So a big thing is that when you have two people and you have a team, and especially in such a delicate situation, sounding like Ramona and Keith, there's going to be conflict of what is beneficial for me, what is beneficial for you. So it's that's when they're kind of the tension between our character comes. And obviously they unite when it's a similar struggle, but when you escape that similar struggle, then what? That's when personal politics gets tricky as well.
Sure. So are any of your characters like sports fans? Like, how does that? Is there even sports in?
I'm not a big sports guy, although Lou is.
Yeah.
So you'll probably see a lot of baseball references.
Okay.
Sprinkled all throughout. He's a big Mets guy. So, so you'll definitely hear that influence all around. Yeah.
So with New York City, we had to talk about things like Wall Street, and of course, Wall Street was in the news quite a bit the last couple of days, with everything going on there. How does that play into the series? The fact that the money of the world is like maybe 6 blocks away from where these characters live, and does that play a factor into anything?
Yeah, actually, that plays a big factor, because the truth is that I wanted to play around with two very big tropes that we're used to. And it's the New York City of like Gossip Girl, right? And our friends. And there's a character here who would perfectly fit in any of those worlds. So what happens is that you take a character who would be perfect in Friends and you put him in an environment like Atlanta. How would he react? Yeah. So it's kind of when Ramona meets people from NYU, all these things. And it's interesting because everyone has their own narrative. Everyone is going through their own story. But to see them overlap and sometimes to see, it's almost like the ignorance of not knowing. And it's not that anyone is bad per se. If you know, there's certain things that it kind of makes you realize, what can I do? It asks questions. And unfortunately, even though you can't always do something in reality, for our characters, it's this, they're teeter to this line between what can I do because of my resources and what should I do because moral, their moral compass.
Yeah, sure. So I'm looking at some of the visuals for the series. It looks very ambitious. Like, it looks like you guys really are trying to go for the jugular here. I mean, so what I see a lot of like, what it kind of reminds me of. Like, I'm a huge fan of this movie called The Crow.
Oh, yes.
And so it has a lot of that aesthetic to it, where it's a lot of grays, a lot of dark colors. It's not a bright city. It's kind of a a dark environment, and it's interesting that you went that way. I mean, why so why so dark in such a where did you guys want to go there with that?
So our goal was to very much bring off that timeless nighttime aesthetic
Yeah.
that New York City has.
Mhm.
I think that Edward Hopper was a big inspiration for me, and mix that in with my love for Batman the Animated Series, the way that that animation took a much more noir tone.
Yeah.
It was something that visually we knew that we wanted to invoke that energy and give it almost that classic timeless feel, which brings us back to the reason that we want to have the aspect ratio and the way that we want to play around with the camera.
Mhm. Yeah, and it looks like, I mean, what as you're setting up for future seasons, you mentioned that this is kind of like an anthology series. It's a comedy, but it's an anthology series.
Yeah.
So is every season are you guys starting over, kind of a thing? I mean, same setting, just different people.
No.
Oh,
So the like I said, the big point is showing the interconnected world of that kind of. I personally believe everyone affects everyone. The butterfly effect. So we see that certain events that our characters took that might have benefited them in season one, we kind of see the other side of the coin.
Mhm.
And it not that it antagonizes our main characters from season one, but it puts things into perspective.
Mhm.
And should this continue on, our main goal is to teeter that, like fall a bit more into the metaphysical aspect of like philosophy, and have our main character be someone coming straight out of prison. And reality just seems different for him. The world seems different, and he doesn't know if it's because so much time has passed, or it's because something's actually going on. And it's interesting to see how this character is affected by the decisions of season ones, even though they don't know each other.
Mhm.
So it's very much a cohesive story narrative.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's funny because you're calling it. You mentioned you guys are looking for like that animated successor to like Twin Peaks, but at the same time, some people forget that like David Lynch is very funny. Like he's made some of the greatest drama television, but like, and I hate to bring this show up, but when he was in Louis, that was some of the funniest scenes. Like when because he was the tryout guy for the Letterman show.
Yeah, for when he was trying out for the late night.
Yeah, and I was like, some of his scenes he just steals. Like he just robs them and burns everything down and goes, and he's so funny. But at the same time, he's created some of the greatest dramas of all time. So I'll be interested to see how you guys merge those two. Like how what's the? I mean, I guess in the last couple of years we've had some pretty good successes there. Like BoJack would be an obvious. I think a show that dealt with depression a certain way, dealt with a couple different things, and then Big Mouth. It's mostly comedy and it's really funny, but it takes a very serious approach when it comes to talking things about like trans lives matter and all this other stuff. So a lot of those things are starting to come to fruition. It's taken a while, but it's coming. And but I mean, it's not like we haven't seen failures on people trying to tackle New York City, especially in an animated form. So I'm thinking of a series like Downtowners comes to mind, and I'm sure there's a couple of others that I could probably even think of, but even The Critic kind of in a sense was based in New York City and all this other stuff. So it's interesting to see the different ways in which New York City is presented over the years and where it's gotten to now. So
I think that our goal was, even before we knew New York City story-wise is very saturated.
Yeah.
So our question was, why do this?
Yeah.
What is it that we're bringing to the table that's different?
Mhm.
So that was always a question that we asked ourselves, because we don't want to say anything that's already been said.
Right.
We could say it differently,
Mhm.
you know, try a different way to articulate it, the idea. But that's mostly why you see visually, it's much more striking New York City. It's and that's where I think that all these elements really come together, because it's like you said, it's already by nature it's a melting pot.
Mhm.
So it's just knowing when and where to place these puzzle pieces, and that's really how I see this whole project.
Yeah.
It's filling in these puzzle pieces that gets your intrigue, that gets you invested, without just making it another attempt at, you know, forced putting anything into story just because. Because I would hate just put stuff in a story and call it a day, you know.
Sure, sure. So last question, and I'll let you go, Anthony, because I know you're busy. So, what are some takeaways that you hope viewers would have? Should this go to series? Like, what are some things that you would love to make sure you got across that you think worked, that would make you see this as a successful endeavor?
So, it would be successful in my eyes if the elements of this story kind of are absorbed by a much more subtle audience, the audience that maybe would be like, I'm really more into you know, I don't see animation for that kind of narrative. Because, like you said, we're trying to tackle something that's very much been done in live action with the David Lynch representation, and it's knowing to be like, no, you can tell a subtle story with the Dominican American character that doesn't have to do with the race explicitly. Like, yes, that's an element of the character, because you need elements to build up a character, but then what? Keith, a big portion of it that he's gay, but that's not a big part of the story,
Right.
because he's more than that. He's someone who is trying to find himself in the world, and it's to learn how to kind of narratively dissect these labels and be like, yes, you can tell stories like that, but make sure that the characters can stand on their own. Take that away, Keith is still a complex character. Take Ramona's race away, and she's still a complex character. Added that adds a little bit of flavor, a little bit of the, you know, the sauce in it.
Sure.
But it's learning how to tell these stories in a much more subtle way.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you know, you're like we said over and over again, New York City really is a melting pot, and it seems like your cast really is a coagulation of, you know, that kind of represents, you know, all the parts of New York City, both, you know, good and bad. I think it sounds like a pretty cool project, and we hope to see more of it, Anthony. So with that in mind, we'll let you go, but thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us. And hopefully we'll be talking to you soon again, and this time for a pickup.
And if you guys want to see any more art similar to the one that's in our pitch pop, you can go to @starefield.com. It's Starefield. @Starefield.
I'll make sure it gets linked. Don't you worry about that, Anthony. So, all right, man. Have a good one. Take care, and have a good weekend too.
Have a good weekend.
Yep. Take care.